a potential transfer story involving a Newcastle striker who, by all accounts, has really made such a positive impact on not just the club but the Premier League, a very complete striker, and that's Alexander Isak. And the idea here on the right side of the back page of the Mail that Arsenal are monitoring him closely. Is he the final piece of the jigsaw? Maybe a little overstated, but is it, Jonathan? Is he? You know, would he be a good fit and fit that number 9 role in that complete way that Arsenal would like?
Yeah, I mean, there were two there were two elements to this, and the first is, Arsenal have been tracking Isak for a while. There's been, for over a year, I think there's been talk about their interest. So obviously they've done their due diligence on him. They've tried to envisage where he would fit in, and obviously Kai Havertz has played brilliantly in the number 9 role. He's actually turned into a world-class number 9 for them, the world-class number 9 that they were probably hoping Gabriel Jesus would be. But obviously a player of Isak's quality, of his Premier League experience, is going to have an impact. And the other side of this is the Newcastle side. There's obviously been like in Craig's story that there's been no contract talks with Newcastle, and that there has been a lot of speculation over the last few weeks that the Saudis are not necessarily as invested or as interested in Newcastle as they maybe were at the time of the takeover, and whether this is just the latest sign of, not apathy so much, but the Newcastle project is just one of so many that they're trying to spin now, and that maybe maintaining Newcastle as a Champions League force, as even a title challenge one day is not necessarily the burning priority for them at the moment.
Just looking at Craig's piece, he is under contract, Jason, until 2028. Not only just because of his talent, his consistency already, his adaptation to the Premier League, but with that length of contract, I mean, it would take a quite significant fee, wouldn't it, to convince Newcastle to sell?
Yeah, I think it would do. And if you remember last season, Newcastle talked about the possibility of having to sell players because of PSR restrictions. And they made it very, very clear at that stage that one of the players they would definitely not be willing to sell was Alexander Isak. And as you say, he's got 3 years left on his contract. And as the story also says, both sides are fairly relaxed about the situation, although Isak's making it quite clear he wants to be playing in the Champions League. Arsenal, I reckon, would have to pay close to £100 million probably to even get Newcastle interested in a player like Isak, and whether or not Arsenal can afford to do that or want to do that remains to be seen, especially with a player who's got quite a long time left on his contract. But it's a sort of story that caused an awful lot of alarm amongst Newcastle supporters. I mean, he's obviously clearly their star player. He's done extremely well since he's gone to Tyneside. But it's a situation that's been going on for quite a long time. I think even at the end of last season there was talk of a new contract being signed as this was going to be sort of a shining new example of the sort of future for Newcastle, and that didn't happen. So I think the alarm bells have been there for some time. But as the story in the Mail says, those talks have now stopped, and both sides are almost not in a standoff, but are sort of waiting to see what happens next.
I wonder how much Phil Foden would be worth right now, given his consistency, given the titles he's won, although perhaps not if he continues to suffer burnout. Jonathan, this back page of the Sun on the left-hand side, tired Phil, burnout like Rodri. And just looking at the quotes here in Ken Lawrence's piece, perhaps what surprises me is how Phil Foden is sort of trying to almost play this down, trying to normalise it, saying, I came back a little bit fatigued from his sort of 69-game season last season, which is normal. Rodri came back like that as well. A few players did. It's normal how many games we play. You have to burn out at some point. I mean, that for me feels, actually even more shocking in some respects. It's almost quite defeatist. It's just, this is how it's going to be. But, we're pointing and signalling at something. He's mentioned it. Rodri's mentioned it. How much will it take before actually this voice grows strong enough to change things?
Yeah, I mean, it's been normalised, but it's not normal, and in any sense, because, well, first of all, the players who were playing 60 games a season, like Foden was, latter stages of all competitions, Euros in the summer, big international tournament, these are, it's 1% of professional footballers, not even that. So these are, by definition, the players who are on the highest salaries, who garner the least sympathy, I guess, from the public when it comes to complaining about their workload. And yet these are also These are the guys who make the spectacle. These are the guys who are at the pinnacle of the game, who set the standards, who make everyone fall in love with the game. And yeah, there does seem to be, certainly in the the first few months of this season, there's been I think a growing groundswell of opinion that we have reached a kind of a point where players are going to say this is not sustainable. We have been trying to sustain this for years and years, but we actually can't. Our bodies can't take it anymore. And that will be the point at which the games authorities will either have to take action or just do not take action, which is basically what they've been doing. But it's becoming increasingly hard to ignore.
Yeah, and when we saw not so long ago European leagues budding up with FIFA Pro, the sort of World Players Union, trying to take on FIFA as well, with the expansion of the tournament and against player welfare as well. A couple of other stories we should really mark before we call time. Back page of the Telegraph, clubs alarm at Nandi plan for regulators. So this is Lisa Nandi, the culture secretary, who, according to Tom Morgan in his piece, sparked alarm within the top tier by claiming that the status quo causes significant wage inflation in the Championship and also increased debt in the Premier League. And this is about the parachute payments, isn't it, Jason? So maybe you could just unpack this story a little bit more for us, for those who maybe aren't quite as close to it, and what's happening with the football regulator.
Well, it is a very complicated story